Everybody remembers Theresa May's speech at the Tory Party conference, don't you? Well, there was a cough, and all that got a cough, right? So I'm just getting my excuse in first. If I have any Theresa May moments. 20 years after the ceasefire, Northern Ireland is still a very divided society. That can be shown in lots of ways. In one way is the fact that still the majority of people live in communities that are dominated by one side of the sectarian divide or the other. We have a situation, well, 20 years later, we still only have 6% of children attending integrated education. And in the current crisis in Stormont over the Irish Language Act, we have the working class in the north completely divided on this issue, where you have 70% of nationalists backing Sinn Féin's position of the need for a standalone Irish Language Act, and 86% of DUP voters backing their opposition to an act. So it is a very deeply divided society. And the background to that people will know about, but for 50 years we know that Northern Catholics suffered massive repression and discrimination under the domination of a gerrymandered unionist government. During those years, and then afterwards, subsequently, when the Troubles erupted, that repression and discrimination continued, and you had horrific events like Bloody Sunday, with the murder of 13 people by the paratroopers, the murder of 11 people in Ballymurphy by the paratroopers, the torture that took place, for example, in Castlereagh police station, and then you had the collusion between the state forces and the loyalist paramilitaries carrying out sectarian murders of hundreds of innocent Catholics. And on top of that, you had the barbaric indifference of Margaret Thatcher to the plight of the hunger strikers in 1980-81. And those are the type of events and conditions that have impacted greatly on the consciousness and the psychology of Northern Irish Catholics, and has cemented their desire and aspiration for a United Ireland. Because Northern nationalists believe and envisage that a United Ireland would be the way that they can overcome the oppression and discrimination that they face. They believe that a United Ireland would be a society in which they would be equal and they can have a better life and a better future. But the legacy of the Troubles just hasn't had a profound impact on Northern Catholics, but also on Northern Irish Protestants as well. It's had a profound impact on both sides of the community. And just as you had the impact of the loyalist murder gangs and the state violence on Northern Irish Catholics and the Catholic communities, on Northern Protestants, the individual terrorist campaign, the Provisional IRA, has had a deeply and profound impact on them as well. You know, in 1967, an opinion poll showed that 20% of Northern Irish Protestants considered themselves to be Irish. Yet by 1993, that figure had dropped to only 1%, which is a massive change in people's outlook. And one of the fundamental reasons why that change took place was because of the impact of the Troubles, and in particular the campaign of the Provisional IRA on Northern Irish Protestants. You know, for example, you had significant sectarian atrocities carried out by the Provos, like, for example, the Shango bombing, or like in 1976, the Kingsmill massacre, where the Provos stopped a minibus containing 11 textile workers who were Protestants, lined them up and shot them, 10 of them dead on the scene. And those type of events have been burnt deeply into Northern Irish Protestants' consciousness, these type of sectarian atrocities, so much so that to the majority of Northern Irish Protestants, Sinn Féin are held in contempt as a political force. And the idea that Sinn Féin now put forward that their role and the role of other nationalist parties is to persuade Protestants that their future would be better served within a Catholic United Ireland is fanciful, because in reality Northern Irish Protestants will never accept a Catholic United Ireland. You know, Sinn Féin have embarked on a whole process of whereby, since the result of the Brexit referendum, they've been campaigning for, which this debate is about, a border poll. And they believe that a border poll can take place within the next 5 years, and that there can be a majority vote in favour of United Ireland. But at the heart of this discussion, this debate, is really about what are the national aspirations of the divided community within the north. and there are conflicting national aspirations. On the one hand, you do have Catholics who the vast majority want to be part of United Ireland, but on the other hand, the vast majority of Protestants see themselves as British, and their aspiration is to remain part of the United Kingdom, and they aren't actually open to being persuaded to be part of a capitalist United Ireland. Obviously Sinn Féin clearly see that a border poll, or as they call it in their document towards United Ireland, a unity poll is the way forward. Sinn Féin argue that United Ireland is inevitable, that can be achieved by persuading a majority of Northern Irish Protestants of the economic benefits of a unitary state. But Sinn Féin also call on all parties that support the idea of United Ireland to come together. They call for, in reality, a form of a pan-nationalist, all-class alliance, obviously bringing together the likes of Sinn Féin, the SDLP, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in this campaign of trying to persuade Northern Irish Protestants of the benefits of a unitary state. And it's not surprising that Sinn Féin argue for this type of all-class alliance, bringing together parties like who are openly capitalist and supportive of the interests of big business and the rich in their campaign, because Sinn Féin gave up a long time ago the pretense of being a party on the left. They, for example, as was said last night in the discussion, Sinn Féin's aim at the next election in the South is to be part of a coalition with either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. I don't think they're necessarily fussed which one of them it is, but they want to be in government with one of the establishment capitalist parties. And we know that such coalitions in the South between capitalist parties and parties like the Labour Party and the Green Party in the past have been a disaster for working class people. They have resulted in an onslaught of attacks on public services and a race to the bottom in wages and job security. But Sinn Féin is now a big business friendly party. You know, for example, in the north, along with their coalition partners for 10 years, the DUP, Sinn Féin argued and successfully got agreement from the British government that they could reduce corporation tax in the north to 12.5%, because their strategy is to entice multinational corporations into the north to create jobs by giving them corporate welfare, to bribe them to come into the country. And it's been well stated by many people that if that cut in corporation tax was to take place, that it would result in £300 million a year less in funding for public services in the north, and that would result in £300 million extra in public services cuts. That's what that bribe to big business would result in for working class people. So rather, we would argue that rather than a border poll being a unity poll, as Sinn Féin call it, that it in fact would be a disunity poll. Sinn Féin support the idea that if there is a border poll, that 50% plus one result is enough of a baseline to actually achieve a United Ireland. They claim that it's just the basis of simple democracy. But as I said already, Sinn Féin's claims are wishful thinking, a flight of fancy, completely divorced from the reality of life in Northern Ireland today. The reality is, as I said at the beginning, Northern Ireland is more divided than it's ever been. And to paraphrase a famous Prussian general, Clausewitz, the peace process in reality has been a continuation of the sectarian war by other means. And now we have two dominant sectarian parties, the DUP and Sinn Féin, slugging it out, both guilty of using language and culture as a sectarian cudgel to beat each other with. And as socialists, we have always seen that unionism and nationalism are part of the problem in Ireland, not part of the solution, and they have no role to play in solving the conflict that we have on this island. We believe that that conflict can only be resolved through working class unity, by uniting Catholic and Protestant working class people in a struggle for socialism against our common enemy, which is the capitalist system, which is responsible for the poverty, for the deprivation, and for the repression that blights society. Now, the Socialist Party doesn't support the calling of a border poll, because we believe that whatever outcome of that poll is, it will result in a qualitative increase in sectarianism with the potential for sectarian conflict. The general election earlier this year gave us a glimpse of what a border poll would be like. After the shock of the Assembly election, where Sinn Féin came within one seat and 1,000 votes of the DUP, where the Unionists for the first time in history lost their majority in the Assembly, the general election became in reality almost like a mini border poll, where Arlene Foster and the DUP mobilised their voters to come out and defend the Union, and where Sinn Féin mobilised their voters to come out to give them a bigger mandate for pursuing a United Ireland. And we had the most polarised election in a generation in the north, and where we had, for example, quite significant increase in voting, the highest voter turnout in 20 years. And in some areas of East Belfast, areas that are like in Dublin, Finglas or Ballymun, hardline working class loyalist areas of East Belfast, the turnout went from 50% to over 70% in response to Arlene Foster's call to defend the Union. And in a border poll, voters will be given a stark choice. They'll be given a stark choice, either yes or no to United Ireland, and everybody will be pushed to taking sides one way or the other. And the result would be the greatest manifestation of sectarian polarisation since partition. And rather than persuading Protestants of the so-called benefits of a capitalist United Ireland, the opposite would be the case. If a poll was to return a majority vote in favour of reunification, it simply would not be accepted by the majority of Protestants. And if there were moves towards trying to implement reunification against the wishes of the majority of Protestants, there would be mass resistance, including potentially armed resistance to those moves. The reaction would be similar in ways to what happened in the early part of the 20th century, when there was a mass mobilisation by unionism in opposition to the prospect of Home Rule. Now there is a very heightened sense of anxiety amongst the Protestant working class about the future of the Union. That's seen in people's reaction to the prospect of, for example, Scottish independence. They see the potential break-up of the Union. The reality is that Sinn Féin will never be trusted by Protestants enough to be able to accept the idea of a capitalist United Ireland. As I said, the reality is that the armed struggle and the whole period of the Troubles reinforced the idea in the consciousness of the majority of Protestants that in a United Ireland they would be a persecuted minority and that their rights would not be respected. Now, many Republicans and also so-called lefts and socialists have argued before that the idea that Protestants will resist even going to the lengths of possible civil war to oppose United Ireland is an exaggeration and an illusion. But we don't believe that is the case. We believe that history has shown that when faced with the prospect of a threat to the Union, that people have resisted in quite insignificant numbers. For example, in 1985, at the time of the signing of the Anglo-Irish Agreement, it's the time when Alex Kane, the well-known unionist commentator, made the point recently in an article when he, in his lifetime, he said it was the closest Northern Ireland ever came to a civil war, when you had 200,000 Protestants amassed outside Belfast City Hall in opposition to that agreement, and where Thatcher and the Southern government were forced to park the Anglo-Irish Agreement because of that opposition. Now, the sectarian role of parties like the DUP doesn't need to be explained to people. It's obvious, it's manifested every day when their politicians, when their representatives speak in public. It's represented by the disdain and contempt that DUP representatives have shown, for example, to the Irish language in the last 12 months. It's shown also by the attitude of the DUP to giving people equal rights and so on. But also the sectarianism of Sinn Féin. I want to make a few points about that, because Sinn Féin claim to be a non-sectarian party. In fact, they recently launched a campaign against sectarianism. But we will dispute Sinn Féin's claim. We think that Sinn Féin is a deeply sectarian party. It is a party which bases itself on one side of the sectarian divide and which constantly speaks only of the rights or the needs of one side of the population. People will know of now the infamous leaflet that Jerry Kelly distributed in the election before last in North Belfast, in which he highlighted the 2011 census results, which showed a majority of the population in North Belfast were Catholics, and where he urged people to vote for Sinn Féin so that there could be a nationalist majority in that constituency. You also have, for example, recently an article in Unpublic, which I don't have time to quote from, which came out on the 1st of September, only a few weeks ago, in which they talk about the housing crisis, and the housing crisis is a serious problem for working class people in the north, as it is in the south. In this very city, the housing crisis is a huge problem for working class people, and the Socialist Party is campaigning for more public housing, for more social housing in the south and in the north, and we talk about the needs and the rights of all working class people. But in that article in Public from the 1st of September, Sinn Féin highlights in Belfast that Catholics have a longer waiting list for a house than Protestants. And the difference is, by a matter of 3 or 4 months between West Belfast and East Belfast, as if that makes a significant difference to the ordinary working class people in both of those communities who actually desperately need homes. And rather than highlight this type of sectarian difference, it would be far more incumbent on Sinn Féin to talk about the needs and the rights of all working class people, which is what the Socialist Party does. And even recently on Belfast City Council, you had on the issue of Catalonia, which is an issue which the Socialist Party obviously defends the rights of the Catalonian people, the self-determination. But on Belfast City Council recently, the leader of the council, of Sinn Féin on the council, Jim McVeigh, stood up with his fellow councillors wearing t-shirts saying Ireland supports Catalonia, and in the middle of the t-shirt was a graphic of a heart within which there were 2 hands shaking. One of those hands was coloured the Catalonian flag, and one hand was coloured in the Irish tricolour. And instantly, by doing that, they took an issue which could have been used to actually try and gain support from both sides of the community for the rights of the people in Catalonia. They instantly sectarianised the issue in the minds of the vast majority